So what this video is going to be about is the reason mechanics should not work on old cars to earn money. I left a comment on somebody else's video and a couple people replied back, and that's why that gave me the idea to make this video. The number one reason is getting parts for these old cars. It takes more time, and with the newer cars you can get the parts right away and you can do those jobs and get paid every single day. The older cars, you're going to have to wait for the parts, and it's going to take more time to get paid on these jobs, and it's just not worth it. Another reason is these customers of these old cars are cheap. They think these old cars are easy to work on, they don't want to spend a lot of money. And that's another reason that I also stopped working on European cars, because people buy these cars used at used car lots for not much money, and then they don't want to spend any money having them fixed, and it takes more time getting parts for those too. Another problem with old cars is they've been apart a lot of times, so they have all the wrong parts on them most of the time. They'll have a lot of aftermarket parts on them, and the reproduction stuff they have on them doesn't work exactly right. So when you go to, all these parts have to work together. So when you go to change something or add something, nothing works right. It takes a lot more time, and these people don't seem to understand that. And it's just not worth it. Recently I had a 71 Chevy C10 truck that I worked on, and not one auto parts store around even had an upper radiator hose for that. And I live in an area where there's a lot of auto parts stores, but nobody had it. Yeah, I had one person call me up and they wanted me to rebuild a carburetor on an old Corvette, and it had a Holley carburetor on it. And the car was 45 minutes away, so I didn't want to have to drive over to where the car was to get the number off of it to order the kit, because I'd have to charge the customer more for that. So I told the customer to take the air cleaner off, write the number down, order the carburetor kit, and when they get the carburetor kit, to call me up. So a few days later the guy calls me up and he says, well, I got the carburetor kit and I took the carburetor off and took it apart like you told me to. He knows I didn't tell him to take it apart. He thought that if he did half the work, that the price would be half as much money to have me finish the job. But so I told him, no, I won't even work on it now. You know, that's how cheap a lot of these people are. Another thing I had happen recently is the 64 Chevelle I worked on. The guy wanted me to put a power steering on it. So it's easy to mount the power steering pump and the pitman arm on there, but nothing else was right on the car. The engine might have been out of a truck or something. You never know what they came out of, but all the brackets, pulleys, and everything on it was wrong. You know, so the alternator was mounted down where the power steering pump should be. It's supposed to have an exhaust manifold with a flange on it, and the alternator and the power steering pump bracket mounts there, but it didn't have the right exhaust manifolds on it. So we get the right exhaust manifolds, or reproduction ones, are pretty expensive. The holes are drilled about 1/8 of an inch off. See, none of this reproduction stuff's right, and it's supposed to also have a flange on the intake manifold that the alternator brace mounts to, but it doesn't have the right intake manifold on it. Another problem, that's on these comments on that video, they didn't understand this, was the radiator was another problem. Somebody welded brackets to the frame and put a late model radiator in it, and the radiator hose is on the wrong side, so now it's against the alternator. So this ended up costing this guy a whole lot of money, and he's not happy about that. And that's another reason not to work on this stuff. You know, and for shops that work on modern cars, they should not work on old cars, because they've never worked on this kind of stuff and they don't know anything about it. Most of those guys there have never seen carburetors, points. They don't know how to weld, and when they can't get the right parts, they don't know how to make the parts work. So it's just not worth it for them to do that. Yeah, another problem I have with the old cars, you know, I don't know how all the different brands are, but with General Motors, any cars that are older than 1994 are in the books. You can't look it up on a computer. So when you go in the dealership, these parts guys, I mean, they got this stupid look on their face when you walk in there, because they don't know how to use the books. There's two big thick books that are about, I mean, one's the illustration catalog, and then you find the group number, and then you go in the other catalog and you find that group number, and then it'll say with this, without that, except that, and you got to really look through all the things and pick out the right one when to get the part numbers. They don't know how to do that. They say, we have to wait until the old guy's here. You know, everybody working in those dealerships should know how to do that. But it's amazing that these people can't do that anymore, so it wastes a bunch of time also trying to do that. And here in California, you know, you can work on a 20-year-old car and it won't have any rust on it whatsoever. But if you work on a car that's like 50 years old, it's going to have a bunch of rust on it, and stuff might break, and it takes more time, and you have to figure all that out into the price, and it's hard to get the customers to want to spend that kind of money. They just don't understand that. Yeah, and at my age, you know, I don't want to spend extra time doing research and other stuff to try to get these cars done for these customers and not make extra money on it. It's just not worth my time. If I'm going to do that, I'd rather just stay home and work on my own stuff. And with a lot of these older cars, you know, they might have had a straight six in it before, and then somebody had a small block sitting around and they put it in there and everything worked at that time, but the stuff on the engine wasn't right to begin with. You know, and customers don't know when they're buying these cars how they are. Yeah, back when I first started out in the late 80s and early 90s, you know, all the auto parts stores stocked all this stuff for the 60s and 70s cars. And a lot of the cars, you'd go to work on them back then, they still had all the original stuff on it. But now these cars are like 50 plus years old, and they're not like that. There's very few of them that are right anymore. So it makes it a lot more difficult working on them. Yeah, I also had an El Camino I worked on a while back, and all I did to this car was replace the distributor. Then the guy keeps calling me up saying the car's not running right and keeps wanting me to come back and look at it for free over and over and over again when there's nothing wrong with it. And he also, the headlights didn't work and the fuse box was all rusted up. So I told him the under the dash wiring harness has to be replaced. So he goes and takes it someplace else, and they scrape the rust off, and it works. So then he calls me up mad saying, why did you tell me the under the dash harness has to be replaced? And I told him, well, what they did is a temporary fix, and I won't do a temporary fix because when it works for a little while and quits, you're going to be calling me up complaining about that and wanting me to keep coming back and looking at the car for free. And I won't do that. He says, well, how do you know it's a temporary fix? I said, well, I've been doing this for over 25 years. You know, sometimes you're dealing with absolute jerks when you're working on this stuff. And with the newer cars, you don't have nearly as many problems. And the best way you can deal with customers like that is just to block their number the first time you have a problem with them and you're done with them. Because these people are they're people that are like that, and it doesn't matter how good the job is, they're going to complain and try to get something for free. And I don't want to deal with it. I just don't have the time and patience anymore to deal with people like that. Yeah, and at 47, I don't have the patience to deal with cheap people anymore. You know, the only thing that really matters is just do a good job and make as much money as you can, and keep the old cars for my own projects, and that's it. Yeah, with my Chevelle that's right here, you know, it took a lot of time to put this back together right. And I've had this car since 1992, and even when I put air conditioning on it, the power steering pump bracket had washers under it to make it line up right. And when I put air conditioning on it, I replaced every single bracket and pulley on the engine. Now everything works right. But back then you could buy original GM parts to do that with. Now you can't even buy that stuff, and the reproduction stuff is total garbage. Yeah, and this is my 70s Chevelle. I've had this since I was 19 years old. Yeah, in November it'll be 28 years that I've had it. And I had another one before that. I had two other ones before that. Yeah, everything on this car is right except I put a switch on it to turn the battery off, and it's got an MSD ignition. Other than that, I put all the original stuff in it. But it was not like this when I got it. It did have a big block in it when I got it, but everything was wrong. One of the exhaust manifolds was wrong on this car too. But back then I bought a new one from GM. Yeah, and if you're going to work on old cars, it's best just to do it for yourself and not make any money at it. Oh, and the comment on the video, these people tried to say that all 64 to 72 Chevelles are the same. No, they're not. All the accessories on the engine are different on those years. 69 to 72 is pretty much the same, but not those early years. Everything on the front of the engine and the intake manifold's different. And then somebody said, well, the radiator couldn't possibly have a problem when you're putting power steering on it. Yes, when the radiator hose comes out on the wrong side, it isn't a problem. They didn't understand that. A lot of these people don't